Good afternoon, everyone. And as I said, I'm David Adair, Head of Community Engagement, and I'm delighted to have some fantastic guests this afternoon with me to join us for this Social Mobility Awareness Day session. We're going to talk about best practice among businesses, hear some stories and some examples of what it really is and why does it matter so much to everyone. But first of all, I'd like to introduce the panel. So we'll start on alphabetical order with the first name. So Emma, that's you. So Emma Cody, please introduce yourself.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. And thank you for inviting me along to be part of this conversation. Such an important topic. As you mentioned, I'm Emma Cody and I am a tax partner, currently responsible for transformation across our tax, legal and people business.
Thanks, Emma. And we've got Holly, our social mobility lead here with us. Hi, Holly.
Hiya, David. Thanks. Yeah, I'm Holly, as David said, and I'm the social mobility lead at PwC, working as part of the wider purpose, community and corporate affairs team. And it's great to be here.
Thanks, Holly. And then last but certainly not least, very lucky to have Sarah Atkinson here, specifically on today when you must be really, really busy. So Sarah, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Sarah Atkinson. I'm Chief Exec of the Social Mobility Foundation. We're a charity that works right across the UK with and for young people from low socioeconomic backgrounds who have ambition and talent and just need a bit of support to get where they are going.
Great. So actually, Sarah, let's start with you. Perhaps you could just set the scene for us. So where is the UK at the moment in the current terms around social mobility? And how does social mobility impact society as a whole?
Yeah, so we're not where we want to be. It's a really important British value of fairness. It's really important to us that hard work and talent ought to be rewarded. But unfortunately, the background you come from, the place you grow up, the kind of school you go to, the jobs your parents do, those still define outcomes much more than hard work and talent. We see big gaps in attainment between children and young people from low-income backgrounds and their more privileged peers. At the age of 5, that's 6 months. At the age of 16, that's 18 months gap in their attainment, and those gaps are bigger between the North East and London, for example. We see challenges in the workplace as well. People from professional backgrounds are 60% more likely to be in a professional job than people from working class backgrounds. And there's a pay gap of almost £7,000 between people working in professional occupations from working class backgrounds and people from professional backgrounds in professional occupations. So we're not where we want to be as a society. We're also not where we want to be as an economy. That's a waste of talent. That's a waste of capability. No business I know has enough skilled people. So we're wasting talented and skilled people by not harnessing that potential.
Absolutely. And I mean, businesses like ours have a major role to play in this. So let's take us through an example. Emma, you're a sponsor partner of our internal social mobility network. And actually, you've got your own personal story. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement here at PwC.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to share my story. I suppose if I sort of give you the highlighted sort of version, grew up in a council house in a relatively deprived housing estate. I was what we call a free school meals kid in those days. But what was really interesting is that even though we didn't have access to lots of different resources, we didn't know that we were any different. So actually we're in a community where everybody felt the same and had access to the same. And it was only really when I went on to secondary school that the differences became really stark. All of a sudden, there were different people with different resources, and being the free school meal and the council house kid, as I was called at the time, it didn't feel great. And that sort of really knocked my confidence to the point where actually I dropped out of most of my secondary education and found it really, really tough. As I sort of grew older, trying to find access to work and understanding what that meant was really, really hard. And that's why now I put so much focus and effort into the social mobility network that we have here, and then also all of the activities that we undertake within PwC, specifically around recruitment, because someone like me would have been totally missed if the sort of traditional recruitment processes hadn't naturally changed.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So recruitment is important, and we're going to be talking a bit about progression later. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you've progressed in the firm?
Yeah, so I joined the firm 15 years ago as a temp, and it was through support from the team that I joined that I was sponsored to do tax exams and then to kind of transition over onto a traditional sort of graduate pathway, which normally I wouldn't have had access to. From there, I have gone through the ranks and made partner 4 years ago, which is a really incredible sort of pathway, if you like, and quite unusual as well. And I attribute that down to when I sort of stepped back into the secondary school Emma, not feeling good about being different and hiding those differences, and then joining an organisation that encouraged me to celebrate those differences is what has made such a huge impact on my career progression. So a combination of the open-mindedness of the team, but then also the kind of personal drive of all of a sudden unpacking that history and then really embracing the difference to kind of push forward.
And it's fantastic to have a role model like yourself leading and sponsoring the Social Mobility Network, which in fact is our largest network. We have many networks at PwC, but the Social Mobility one is the largest. So it just shows that even those that aren't from a social mobility background are really passionate about trying to make change.
I think that's absolutely right. So we have 3,800 members, and all of those members are from different walks of life, if you like, but everybody is equally as committed to shifting the dial and making a difference, which is so powerful.
Yeah, so Holly, moving on to you. I mean, you're expert in the field at PwC. What specific policies and interventions have been most successful that we could share with some of the other businesses here?
Yeah, well, there's so many, David, and actually we're still very much on a journey. So I'm sure there'll be many more things we do and different interventions we try in the future as well. But there are loads I could share, and I'll just share a few highlights, given the time we've got. But I think some of the key things for me would be data. So you obviously don't know what you haven't got data around. And actually going back sort of 5 years, we only had about 17% of our staff who would disclose their socioeconomic background to us. We weren't getting consistent data at the recruitment stage. And now we have 95% of our staff who have answered the question around their socioeconomic background, which is absolutely fantastic and enables us to obviously look at that data, which I'll come on to around progression in a little while. I think, the way we did that was through a really sustained campaign and explaining to people why it's important, why we need it, and what we're going to do with it. That really is all about making PwC a fairer place to work. I think a couple of other examples, on recruitment, there's been loads of action, particularly around student recruitment for a number of years. For example, removal of UCAS points back in 2015, updating the recruitment process, and most recently last year, removing the 2:1 degree requirement because of the correlation between socioeconomic background and academic attainment. We've also got a really wide range of routes into the firm. As you'll know, we've expanded our technology degree apprenticeships. We've got school leaver routes, undergraduate routes. So we've obviously, really expanded the ways that you can get into the firm. And I think, community engagement is massively important to us, giving back to our communities, allowing our staff to do that, and supporting students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to develop the skills that they need to succeed in their career, whether that's at PwC or anywhere else. And the final one I'd just point to is our advocacy work. So we work with the Social Mobility Foundation, fantastic organisation to work with, in really raising awareness around the important issue of social mobility and social inclusion.
Yeah, actually, I'll bring you in, Sarah, again, because you see many businesses. Are there any tips that you could give? Is data really something that businesses should start collecting?
Yeah, data is really important. It's not to find out if you've got barriers and difficulties for people from low socioeconomic backgrounds in your organisation, because we know that's systemically an issue, but to find out where you are and to set yourself some targets and goals, that data is incredibly important. You may mean you want to have a look at your recruitment and think, actually, we're attracting people, but we're not appointing them. They're not making it through our processes. Or it may be that your problem is progression. You've got a great pipeline, you've got really diverse early careers intake, but people you recruit are not staying and progressing in your organisation. So data is critical for understanding that and understanding what interventions are making a difference. I also think in collecting data, you can't but have an important conversation in your organisation about social mobility, what it is and why it matters. Social work background is not a protected characteristic. It's not a legal requirement to have data on this. Sometimes people are not used to answering questions, and we know there can be a stigma around coming from a working class background and working in a professional environment. People don't always feel comfortable in sharing that information. So to be able to collect data, to be able to get colleagues to be willing to share their information means you've built a good conversation and good trust around your agenda. So one of the things we suggest always as a first target is actually response rates. How many people in your organisation are prepared to answer questions about their socioeconomic background? That's a really good early indicator of where you are with your kind of strategy and comfort levels.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Holly, could you maybe tell us where we are on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. So as I said, we've got 95% of our staff that have answered the question around the socioeconomic background. And what that's enabled us to do is use the data to look at the impact that socioeconomic background has on someone's career. So looking at promotions, performance ratings, and pay, and people will be able to see on our website that we've published our socioeconomic background data by grade for the last 2 years. We've also published our socioeconomic background pay gap for the last 2 years, and what we're working on this year as a progression to that is setting targets around socioeconomic background for the proportion of new hires and the proportion of our workforce at each grade who are from a lower socioeconomic background. And those targets are going to be based on, lots of data, lots of analysis, and looking at the flow rates within our organisation as well. We're also refreshing our socioeconomic background or social inclusion strategy as well. So we'll be looking at the data to inform that strategy and make sure that we're taking actions in the right areas.
No, great, and it's great to hear a northern accent on here as well, and it's not all based down in London. Sort of on that place-based change, Sarah. Do we see certain regions having more of an impact than others, or do we not really have a feel for that? I know we've got the cold spots.
Definitely, there are geographical differences when it comes to social mobility, regional and sometimes even quite local. Bradford, which is an area I know PwC knows very well. Bradford is a place that has some of the worst outcomes for disadvantaged young people. Average earnings for disadvantaged young people in Bradford are £9,500 a year. In Harrogate, not very far away, but a very different kind of environment. Disadvantaged young people, average earnings are £18,000. So that's poverty, but that's also place. Even in quite a local area, the class pay gap in Bradford is 2.5 times bigger than that in Harrogate. So place really matters. The sense of in communities of what opportunities there are, what happens to people like us. That's a conversation that we often hear. The young people we work with talk about that. They talk about being underestimated, being held back, and they also talk about some of the challenges of being successful from a community and an environment where that's unusual, and that can feel pressure as well. So it's a complicated piece, but place-based aspects of social mobility are really important.
Gosh, there's some really stark differences there, aren't they? Emma, we talked a little bit about data collection and the importance. How important do you feel it is?
I think it's incredibly important for all of us to understand the size and shape of our workforce, so that we can, and sort of the background to our workforce, so that we can understand, where we are and what we need to do, how we need to change, how can we kind of implement inclusion policies so that we can address that point that Sarah made earlier on. But one thing that I think is so important when we're collecting data is to look beyond the data and see the people. If you're an individual that doesn't feel comfortable in speaking out, the way that you can get to those individuals to kind of encourage them to come forward is to share stories. And for me personally, joining the firm, I was hearing stories from the likes of Kevin Ellis and Laura Hinton sharing their stories and being really open about it. And for me, that was an opportunity for me to sort of stick my hand up and go, yeah, I understand this, I'm part of that. So I think data is super, super important, but not to sort of forget the human side of it and how valuable it is to share the stories.
Yeah, I think that's really important. For those that don't know, Kevin Ellis is our chairman, and Laura Hinton is on our executive board. And again, I think it shows that senior buy-in on this right from the top is really essential as well. So, Sarah, your Class Payday campaign, which has been a great success, and there's been some very different films that we've supported on that, but they've been very impactful, and they're a great way for employees to take action. What have you learned from this, and what could you call businesses to do through it?
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, we've tried to be creative with the Class Pay Gap campaign, because sometimes you talk about the stats in this, and they are stark. That there's a class pay gap between professionals from working class backgrounds and professionals from professional backgrounds of £7,000 is pretty stark. But we wanted to bring out the kind of humanity of what that means. We're talking about people whose capability is not being used and is being wasted. And that's why we've taken these kind of creative approaches with the films and the mock adverts. I think we've learned from that how important it is to enable that conversation and to talk about the human side as well as the kind of the data and the hard stats. One of the best things that we've learned from the Class Pay Gap campaign is how important it still is to give people the opportunity to say, that's me, that's my story, I feel seen, and I feel empowered by this campaign to be able to tell my story and my conversation. And that's been really, really powerful. The reason we focus on the class pay gap is because often when we talk about social mobility, we think about education, we think about young people, we think about entry and outreach. And those are incredibly important. It's a big part of our charity's work. But if even the very talented, very hardworking young people like the Social Mobility Foundation students, with the support that we give them and all of their capability, if they're still facing the prospect of not being able to progress as well as their peers because of their backgrounds, what does that say about how things are set up? So we want businesses to, think that class pay gap is a really important indicator of what's going on in the workplace in terms of progression. It's a complicated picture, the role of networks and sponsorship, how work gets allocated, cultures, things like accent and the way that people speak. It's a complex picture, but we're looking at the class pay gap as a really important indicator. So ultimately, we want businesses to measure, publish, and close your class pay gaps. Measuring is a complicated business in the first place, but measure it, find out where it is. Probably won't be pretty to start with, won't be very comfortable, but then publish it, talk about it, and set yourselves a goal to do the things that will narrow that class pay gap in your organisation. And I'm really pleased that PwC have taken a lead on this. It's so important to show leadership.
No, well, thanks, Sarah. And I know we're all on the journey in this area, and I'm conscious there'll be businesses and many other organisations listening here. What a single most impactful change do you think an organisation can implement to support genuine social mobility?
Yeah, I think it is collecting that socioeconomic background data for the reasons that we've talked about, being able to set yourself some challenges on moving the dial, but also because you can't do it without that conversation, normalising a conversation where we say, I've had some opportunities because of my background and some things that have come easily to me, and I've had some barriers and difficulties and I've needed some help, and that's my story. And when we normalise that everybody needs help and support to be able to achieve what they're capable of, and that we need to make sure everyone's got access to it, that's really powerful. And so that data collection that combines with that, setting that priority that ours will be an organisation where we talk about this and we go on the journey together. That's the key.
No, great. And Emma, what do you think is one of the most important things an organisation can implement?
Apologies there, sorry. I was so into what Sarah was saying, I was furiously taking notes on that. I think, I completely agree with Sarah. We do need to normalise and sort of not put a red flag on individuals that are different, for example, because they are within a sort of smaller number of the workforce. So creating getting that data, understanding the data, making it normal and equal and even for everybody has to be absolutely key. And removing those barriers, that has to happen. And I think to get there, we need to really understand how these individuals feel. So how do we reach out to a much wider audience than what we potentially would typically do, to really kind of reach out and offer our support, our networking, our mentoring? Because one of the barriers that is there is if you don't know what opportunities are there to exist because it's not in your world, you don't have people around you that can sort of point to what your broader opportunities are, then that's really difficult. So I think it's sort of a two-pronged approach, if you like.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of cross-sectionality, isn't there, as well, between gender and ethnicity and other areas as well. Holly, what do you think is the most impactful change?
So I definitely agree on the data. What gets measured gets done, and if you don't know what what your data's showing you, then you can't take targeted action in the right area. I think the other one I would say is like develop a strategy around social mobility. So there are lots of organisations that have been working on other issues around inclusion and diversity for many years and might be newer to the area of social mobility and social inclusion. So I think developing a strategy, making sure that there's someone within your organisation with responsibility for, taking action on social mobility and incorporating social mobility into your inclusion strategy would be great. I think making yourself accountable by setting targets, and that's not just necessarily targets around like proportion of your workforce and proportion of your hires from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, but targets like, how many young people are you working with out in your communities? How many young people are you helping develop skills? How many work experience opportunities are you offering to young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds? And we've recently ring-fenced 2 of our work experience programs, both at sixth form level and undergraduate level, specifically for those for lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So I would say developing that strategy. And one of the other things I was just going to touch on data, in case there's any organisations on the LinkedIn Live who were thinking, well, what do you actually ask? What do you actually measure? Because there might be, if you're early on in your journey. We use the guidance that is recommended by the Social Mobility Commission, which is that the best question to ask is, what did your highest earning parent do at around age 14? So it's all around your parental occupation. There's lots of other measures. There's 3 others that are also recommended by the Commission, but that's the best one, and that's the one we use. And the final thing I was going to say in relation to the strategy is, if you're looking at setting up a strategy and thinking, where do I even start? The Social Mobility Employer Index is a fantastic place to start, because that will tell you, exactly what you're already doing, what you could be doing more of, what you could do a little bit differently, and the feedback from that is really, really valuable.
No, that's great, and a great plug there, Sarah, for your index.
Yes, thanks for that, Holly.
I thought you'd like that, Sarah.
Well, the theme for today is actually speak more, and I guess we're going to have to speak less in a while. But Sarah, could you just maybe tell us a bit about today and why it's been so important to talk about social mobility and get the conversation flowing?
Yeah, I mean, having an awareness day for something that is an issue and matters all the time, in a way it can seem a bit silly. Why should we have one day? We want to talk about this all year. We need to work on this all year, and we absolutely do. But having a day that enables people, really to focus activity, really encourages people to feel bold. I've seen a lot of social media posts, and I've been in events today where people have felt prompted for the first time to talk about their background, their journey, the help they've had, the people or organisations that they owe something to, who saw their talent. And these kind of awareness days can really make a difference to that. They can bring a kind of focus and a liberation around the topic that I think is really exciting. I think the theme of Speak More is particularly good, because one of the things that we absolutely need to do, we need to have the conversation. We need people from all backgrounds to be able to talk honestly about the help they've had, the things that have come easily, the difficulties they've faced, not to feel as though that you can't talk about your background because it's not relevant, or it's not something that comes with you every day. So feeling free to talk about yourself is a really important part of this. So speak more is a great theme, I think, and I have seen some great, brave conversations happening today.
No, well, I mean, we owe a lot to you and your organisation for really raising the profile. And I guess we should really also give a shout out to Making the Leap, who I think initiated the day and have their Social Mobility Awards. So if anybody wants to enter those for the work that they're doing, I know that the deadline's coming up, so a little plug for them as well. But I just really would like to thank you all for your insights. It's been really insightful, and some of those stark figures that you mentioned, Sarah, will really give us all some food for thought to work on. Thanks everyone for being on the panel. I'd like to thank Emma, Sarah and Holly, but I'd also like to thank you all for tuning in, particularly on a hot day like today. And we've recorded this session and we will be sharing on the PwC YouTube page. So if you want to listen back or share it on social media, please do. So just a big thank you, and do enjoy the rest of Social Mobility Awareness Day.